right. Hey, everyone. Good day. My name is Mark Benchap, and welcome to another edition of Anansi Web Education, a program that started about, let's say, maybe 2, 3 weeks ago. And as we wrapping up, when I say wrapping up, we're the couple days before emancipation. Big celebration, ought to be a big celebration, something that we should be celebrating and embracing as our history, not only for our generation, but generations to come. This discussion today, we have, my regular sidekick, so to speak, on Anansi Web Education, former president David Arthur Granger, and we have no stranger as well, Shellon Washington, attorney at law, and we have Mr. Wayne Caesar, our accountant, with us. But we will be talking about these are the four areas we want to touch on this beautiful day. Is what are the factors, or what factors contributed most to the achievement of African emancipation? Which martyrs, death, and sacrifices of Africans contributed most to emancipation? And why has emancipation not succeeded in eradicating African poverty after 185 years? And then finally, how can the annual celebration of emancipation improve people's lives today? We are not going to waste any time. We're going to get straight into today's program. And let me just take the time to welcome our guest, so to speak, or we will be having this conversation. It's just a conversation, mind you. Let me welcome everyone: Mr. Granger, Ms. Shellon Washington, and Mr. Wayne Caesar. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure being here.
Let's start off by asking the former President Granger, how are you feeling as we prepare to celebrate Emancipation Day, another year?
Well, it's always exciting. It's something to look forward to, and I think most of the African Guyanese look forward to emancipation, even though, in a general sense, all ethnic groups have been affected by emancipation. And in fact, I regard it as a national celebration. It's the birth of our nation. It was the most important factor in bringing Indians, Portuguese, Chinese to Guyana. And that's when Guyana started as a nation. And if you look around the country today, you'll see that all of this was only possible by the Africans fighting for emancipation. So it should be a time of excitement, and we hope that it should be a time of social cohesion in which people come together. It's not an ethnic festival. People should come together, and their children should understand how emancipation contributed to their being here and to the freedoms they enjoy. So I don't know the mood. I haven't been in public for a little while, but it certainly in the countryside, it used to be a widely anticipated and widely celebrated event.
Absolutely, I can attest to that as well. But let's go to Miss Washington, originally from Linden. Growing up, what was it like when you heard of emancipation, or maybe the community and the township, or maybe your family celebrating emancipation? What was it like then, and what's the mood? How are you feeling now about Emancipation Day?
Emancipation, back when I was a child, it was a very special celebration. What happened is most of the people from Linden, they would dress in their African outfit, and they would head to Georgetown for the national park celebration. So it was really, really exciting when I was growing up. Everyone, talked about it. They prepared for it. They made sure that they had their African outfit for that particular day. I think it was always meant to be a time of, reflection, to celebrate, to enjoy. And I think as we are today, I think we're Guyanese are still celebrating it in the same manner as, when I was a child. But I think our focus, it has been shifting over time in terms of we're still celebrating, but I think we're more focused now in terms of accomplishing the goals or keeping in sight what emancipation really means to us, and continuing to work towards indeed having or seeing Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese free.
Absolutely. Well said. If you're now joining us, this is Anansi Web. It's all about emancipation. And we are discussing emancipation, celebration, and how proud we should be of our ancestors. Mr. Wayne Caesar, originally from Plaisance. What was it like growing up and hearing about emancipation and the freedom of our African ancestors?
Mark, it was quite interesting because I recall my grandfather used to sit myself down, my brothers and all my cousins, and he would talk about emancipation and what it meant to him, what the struggle was like for our ancestors, our foreparents. And listen, today I sit down here a very, very proud man. I am proud of the accomplishment of our ancestors. And I'm really looking forward to August 1st personally, spending some time in reflection of, what would have happened, the struggle that our foreparents would have went through to get us to this point. They are the reason that all of us on this panel can sit here today and discuss emancipation. It's because of their accomplishment. They were able to hand Guyana over to us, and we need to carry this on. Listen, August 1st needs to be a day of celebration. It also needs to be a day that parents would sit down their children, maybe early in the day before you go to the festivities, and edify them on emancipation and what would have really occurred and the reasons that they can sit freely in Guyana and live freely today.
Absolutely, a day to be celebrated even more, August 1st. And I agree with Wayne that it is something that it should be like a breakfast, over the breakfast table discussion early in the morning in the villages, the drums, and so forth and so on. But remember, emancipation, enslavement, 1838. It ended, supposedly ended in 1838. Today we are talking about what factors contributed most to the achievement of African emancipation. Let's go to Mr. Granger on that question. What factors contributed most to the achievement of African emancipation, sir?
Thank you, Mark. Most major events, either nationally or internationally, are the result of what historians may call multiple causation. It's not a single factor. And what I would say is that the most important single factor was certainly the resistance, the rebellion, the revolts by the Africans themselves. And they made the whole system of slavery untenable. They were not alone, but I would say the most important factor was that the enslaved Africans never accepted the indignity of enslavement. And from the time they were captured in Africa, they mutinied, they jumped off the ships when they landed here, they revolted, they rebelled, some of them ran away to the bush, set up maroon colonies. Many Guyanese don't even know that we had maroons in Guyana. And it became so expensive that the British government had to set up a special British West Indies regiment to control these revolts. And they would move from island to island and to British Guiana. In fact, members of the British West Indies regiment actually shot down the rebels on the 20th of August, 1823. So it became very expensive to maintain control. So the biggest fact, the most important fact, was the fact that Africans never accepted slavery and they continued to rebel. There were other factors. Because of the high cost of suppressing slave revolts, the British merchants and the industrialists started looking for cheaper sugar. It was very expensive to bring captives from Africa, to employ them on the plantation, to suppress these revolts. And after a while, they looked for countries that did not have slavery and they did not have to suppress revolts. So the economic factors, in which you had this, what they call laissez-faire free enterprise. The merchants wanted, cheap food for their workers. So the thinking was changing. And another important fact too is that there was an intellectual process called enlightenment in Europe, and this gave birth to the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And a lot of Christians said, look, the humans holding humans in bondage is not acceptable, it's not a part of Christianity. And they fought against it too. So there was not only the rebellion of the Africans themselves, but there was the intellectual move. There was an industrial change with the Industrial Revolution. People that let us get away from this expensive sugar. Up to now, it's a lesson Guyanese still have to learn. To produce sugar without slavery, without the harsh conditions. And also the evangelists played a role. And first, there was something called the London Missionary Society, which the Congregational Church, I don't know if any of our guests on the program are Congregationalists, but that was the first church to go to the African people in Guyana. So there were multiple causes. And I would just put that on the table for our colleagues to discuss. Certainly, resistance by the Africans, the changes in the world economy, and the views of the Enlightenment and the Christian, the evangelical Christians, all contributed to the achievement of African emancipation.
Well said, David Arthur Granger there. We go over to Michelle in Washington. Describe to us and, of course, our audience, those of you who are watching, we want to say good day to all of you. And as we prepare to celebrate Emancipation Day, let us feel that pride. Let us go out and celebrate. We just want to in advance say happy Emancipation Day to all of you, whether you're in Guyana, outside of Guyana, wherever you are. Ms. Washington, can you briefly describe for us what was it like growing up in Guyana as a little Black girl, so to speak, a little African girl, your roots and so forth, and hearing people talk and reading the history about African history, and it all centered mainly around slavery and slaves. And how did that make you feel as a little Black girl, so to speak?
Mark, me listening to what President Granger said just brought right back to me all of the history that I learned in high school when I studied West Indian history, the West Indian history books. One of the things which I am very proud of and very grateful of is, growing up in Linden, my skin color was never the highlight of anything. So I was never meant to feel as if I was inferior to anyone. That wasn't a part of the culture in Linden. In fact, once I moved to Georgetown and then I went to Trinidad to study, and then I came to the United States, and I recognized that a lot of women my age were like complaining and their skin color was a problem, and they were more focused on that. Then is when it became a reality to me. But growing up in Linden, where almost everyone else looked like me, there was no problems. I wasn't made to suffer any form of discrimination, or nobody looked down at me. In fact, we were, we were living in unity in Linden. And even though there were few Indians and Amerindians, no one spoke about, oh, you're different, or you're too dark, or, it was just the general jokes that people make about somebody being dark skinned, but nothing of the sort as it relates to our race. So when I listened to President Granger, it just really took me back to my history in school, because that's the only place where I was taught about slavery a lot. We were never taught about slavery in the churches. The churches didn't push that, or it wasn't something that was regularly discussed in our home. My parents would talk about it, but not to any great extent. So in school, on the other hand, we were taught about how, the humanitarians and the abolitionists, and how the churches, as the president said, they all work together in terms of coming together and fighting against slavery for emancipation. And I think it's a lot about the work of the abolish, and the the people who work towards the emancipation. But one of the things I think that really pushed that, like the president said, is the Africans' mindset. They were never satisfied with sitting and being slaves. So at every opportunity, I think they try and they push towards trying ways of escaping, finding ways to see if there's a possibility for them to be emancipated. So I think that would have never stopped. They would have continued to fight and find newer ways. And I did learn about the Marines, the Maroons. I'm sorry, the Maroons are almost in every single Caribbean history books. About how they fought and how they helped the slaves, because the Maroons were very versatile in the interior. They knew how to maneuver their way around. I think if you were thinking about guerrilla warfare, the Maroons were like that back in those days. So, Mark, when we talk about slavery, emancipation, fighting against it, the abolitionists, the humanitarians, the churches. Those are all things that we learn in the Caribbean history books, not necessarily at my family table, like I heard being said earlier.
Absolutely. Shallon Washington there for us. And I'm certain that many of you in the audience are reflecting on what it was like growing up and hearing about your African ancestors, those who were enslaved, and what it was like, and how proud we should be as a people where we are today. Have we achieved a lot? We have achieved a lot, but should we achieve more? Can we achieve more? There's always room for improvements and so forth, but we must give that respect and acknowledgement to our ancestors, our African ancestors, who would have endured the brunt of almost every barbaric acts you can ever imagine. Wayne, what was it like in Plaisance growing up and hearing about the rich history of Plaisance, Africans buying villages, Plaisance, Victoria, and those sort of things? How does it make you feel, sir?
You know, Mark, when I went to school, and I went to school at St. Paul's Primary in Plaisance, and you would have gotten together with your social studies teacher, and you hear them talk about slavery and the conditions that our ancestors would have faced, the conditions that they would have lived under, and to hear them, kind of depict to you how they would have come together as a group and pool their monies and purchase these villages. It was interesting because I was trying to think, well, okay, what did they do, to earn the monies, and I try to think of the sacrifices that were made, to purchase these lands. And as they inhabited the lands, there were many who still remained on the plantation working. So although they inhabited the lands that they would have purchased, there were still some of them who remained on the plantation to work, to continue to earn so that they can buy other villages, and the trend just continued. It's interesting because I always try to envision, what Pleasance would have looked like, in those times. And to watch the development today, although I am not fully satisfied, Mark, with the development across Plaisance and Victoria, I think there have been major delays in development of these African Guyanese villages across the board. Especially, I mean, I was quite satisfied with what I see on the great LFS, Lyndon Forbes, Samson Barnum, and the Honorable Hugh Desmond Hoyt. But once we had the PPP government, in power under those under the PPP in those 23 years, I feel like if those villages, Mark, has been neglected and lacks development. You look at the sidelines, you look at these places, the roads are not completed. I know we had a period of the coalition in government, but that being said, 5 years is not enough to repair what would have been lagging for 23 years. So, listen, when I look at the history of Plaisance, I see a rich history, our ancestors, working hard and developing Pleasance to the best of their ability. There was a lot of farming done in these communities also. That was one of the main things that our ancestors did. They did a lot of farming. And today I would like to see, although there may not be enough land for the widespread farming that our ancestors were doing, it's enough to have a little kitchen garden. And I think Mr. Granger would have hinted on this a couple of times, that it's a good thing to have a little kitchen garden, you know, and that would kind of show your respect to your ancestors and where you would have come from, while also producing food in your home. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wayne Caesar, reminding me about the kitchen garden and our little kitchen garden there, the beautiful village on the quarantine. Not Auckland, Mr. Granger, not Auckland. I see you were hoping that I would say Auckland, right? But Philippi. You're familiar with Philippi and all those kitchen gardens there. Good day to all of you beautiful folks listening to us, whether you're from Kildonan, wherever, preparing to celebrate the Emancipation celebrations. August 1st, whether Leeds Village, Nurney, Limlayer, all across Guyana, Linden, Belladrum, you name it, all across. Which takes me now to our next topic here, and Mr. Granger will take the first hit at this. The martyrs' deaths and sacrifices contributed most to emancipation. And also, we'll just, since we're looking at time as well, why has emancipation not succeeded in eradicating African poverty after 185 years? I think Mr. Caesar alluded to the fact that for 23 years, we can do several programs just to the damage done for those 23 years from 1992 all the way to 2015. Tremendous damage done to the entire country, but more so to African villages also. So, Mr. Granger, the martyrs' deaths and sacrifices contributed, and what has emancipation not succeeded in eradicating, or why has emancipation not succeeded in eradicating 185 years of emancipation?
Well, I can go back to Shalon's point, that the trials and tribulations of the enslaved Africans caused them to revolt, and there was a blood sacrifice. They paid with their lives, and this is not accidental. These are people who faced British rifles and bullets and bayonets, and they continued going forward. And the four greatest revolts were in 1763 in Babis. And of course, we must pay tribute to Kofi, who is a national hero and who led that revolt. The second one was in 1795, which is not well known on the West Coast, Demerara. And the leader of that revolt was named Amsterdam, and he's very cruelly tortured. And the third one, as you know, was in 1823, and there are 200 martyrs. Of course, they're anonymous, but we know that tribute is paid to Kwamina, who was the spiritual, intellectual, inspiration. And of course, the fourth one was in Essequibo, and Damon, as you can see, picture there, Damon led a revolt after emancipation was promised on the 1st of August, 1834. The freed Africans were told they had to go back and work for the same master, the same plantation for 6 more years. And Damon said, no, we're not going to do that. And you can see he raised the flag in churchyard at the Bell Alliance. But the statue is at Anna Regina. I said, we're not going to do that. And of course, he was arrested and he was executed outside the public buildings in Georgetown. So we must pay tribute to those martyrs. They shed their blood, they died for freedom. And that was the most important factor. And we must remember those four, Kofi, Amsterdam, Kwamina, and Damon as the four people who actually died for our freedom. But as you meant, to save time, I'll go on to the next question. We don't need to linger too much on the actual martyrdom, but martyrdom was important. because it convinced the British that we were going to die rather than remain in an enslaved condition. So it was important, and it helped to sway what Shalon refers to as the evangelical element, and the conscience, the Christian conscience of Western civilization. But let me go on to the next question you asked, because I think that is also very profound. Why has emancipation not succeeded in eradicating African poverty? Now, the big question is that although emancipation was necessary, it was not sufficient. And again, we go back to what Wayne was saying was taking place in Plaisance. Um, Shalon doesn't come from a coastal village, but Wayne could tell you without, he mentioned the word sidelines, without those sidelines and middle walks, Plaisance cannot be drained. And for most of the African villages on the coast, control of drainage and irrigation was essential to survival. And the British planters, even after emancipation, controlled drainage and irrigation. And you can see what happened in 2005. You can see what happened in 2021 under the PPP. If the government does not pay attention to drainage and irrigation, people will suffer. And during the second half of the 19th century, the African Guyanese population actually declined because of the incessant flooding, the cyclical flooding, and many waterborne diseases, cholera and dysentery, malaria, and so on, literally decimated the African population. And because the planters wanted to punish the African villages, and sometimes villages were deliberately flooded. So that is one of the reasons why, although Africans saved their money to buy these villages, which is very praiseworthy, they did not have enough money to provide drainage and irrigation. And up to the present time, 2023, we still see that there's the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority, which cannot prevent flooding in Georgetown or throughout the country. So I think that the infrastructure is one factor, and I allow Wayne, as a villager, to speak about the problems of village development that he might have encountered. And Shalon, although she's not a villager, is aware of the importance of infrastructure development. But my contribution here is that the villages remain largely poor. And that is why, on another occasion, we must discuss, the International Decade for People of African Descent. The villages remain relatively poor because of the drainage and irrigation problems and in other infrastructure problems. Many of the Indian villages were supported by the colonial government to keep the Indians in Guyana so they wouldn't go back home to India after their indentureship ended. But many of the Africans had to stay here, and some of them suffered, but the villages survived.
The villages survived. It took a lot for those villages to survive. It took a lot for those villages to still be there. Lots of sacrifices made, ancestral lands. We're hearing a lot of controversial stories about ancestral lands being taken away, stolen from those people who rightfully are the owners, are the rightful owners of those lands. It's something else we can take a whole program or two to touch on. Miss Washington, as we look at wrapping up time, not just yet though, but what was it like, listening to all of these heroes, those heroes, Coffee and Damien and so forth, and as you take a drive by, I'm sure you probably did excursion from Linden to Georgetown and probably drove around Coffee Square of the Revolution. Describe what's the feeling like when you saw for the first time maybe the Coffee at Square of the Revolution and reflecting on the history of how he rebelled against those slave masters.
Oh, absolutely. I have, during my years in, I think, primary school and high school, visited the monument, the 1763 monument of coffee. And I think, it it helps to highlight the resilience of Afro-Guyanese or African as a whole. When the British wrongfully took them from their home, what they called their home, and brought them to different countries in the West Indies, including Guyana, it must have been really difficult. And I imagine that they would have done exactly what they did, which is continuously fight for ways or seek different means and ways of which they could free themselves. And I think the martyrs for Guyana, Kofi, Kwame, Amsterdam, and Damien, I think what they did is set the stage to assist or strengthen the minds of Afro-Guyanese to continue to push towards emancipation. I think without them, people would have kept fighting, but we always need a leader. I think people always need somebody to step in the front and be willing to be the ultimate sacrifice to accomplish a goal. And once people see there's one person that is willing to take this risk, people generally follow. And I think that was one of the greatest thing that we had in Ghana. People like Kofi and Damien and Amsterdam, and if they hadn't take the risk that they did to lead the revolution, to fight to ensure that Afro-Guyanese were free, or at least the stage was set for their freedom, I think without them, it would have probably taken a longer time, because even with the economic crisis, even with everything that was happening, the British were still reluctant. And even to this day, there were people that were very, very reluctant to allow their slaves to be set free. And as it relates to the other issue, as the impact economically on Afro-Guyanese as to why whether or not the poverty has been eradicated after emancipation. But I don't think poverty would be eradicated that easily. One of the problems we have faced is years and years and years of slavery, which essentially robbed all those Africans of all those years of wealth. Those years of wealth was essentially taken. It was stolen. So it was never replaced. There was never a talk about restitution. There was never a talk about finding a ways to give back to the Afro-Guyanese what was stolen from them. And I think in some countries, especially the United States, there's always talk about reparation. There's always talk about what they're going to do, steps they're going to take to restore what was lost. And I think in Ghana, it's the same thing. If you take from somebody 300 years or more, you just take and you take and you take all of the wealth that they would have gotten to pass down to generations, from generation to generation, and you leave them with nothing. It's difficult for them to, go back and, find a way to restore. That's decades worth, that's years, hundreds of years worth of stripping wealth and economic freedom from those people. So to restore that, it's going to be a very, very difficult task. And, we've heard members of the panel, even Wayne, speak about how, he heard about ancestors working to gain money to purchase lands. And even with that, it still doesn't restore all that was lost. They would have gained something from working hard. Yes, they went and they worked hard, but still it's not easy to restore generational worth of wealth, which the Europeans has. They have taken something that didn't rightfully belong to them. That's a form of taking. It's in our times and in the legal sense, that would have been essentially larceny. It's a wrongful taking. You're taking something that doesn't rightfully belong to you. And then there's no international law, there's no humanitarian law that says, okay, you've taken something that was wrongfully, it belonged to somebody else, and now you have to give it back. There's nothing that would tell them they have to give back all of the wealth that was lost. And in the context of Guyana, all those slaves who worked hard and they purchased land, and the land is still sitting there, and now the government is trying to take it, because of the eminent domain issue. We can stand up and try to fight and say, well, our ancestors worked hard for this and they're entitled to it, and then you're entitled to give them the infrastructure that they need to work the land or to do whatever they require to do. But the fact of the matter is, the current government doesn't really care much about the sacrifices, the ultimate sacrifices that African Guyanese made to be where they are today. And I want to reflect on that. And I would say that moving forward, we've got to find better ways of how we're going to get around the obstacles that African Guyanese are still facing, even as we celebrate Emancipation Day.
Obstacles indeed to get around and to ensure that we eradicate whatever those move out those obstacles. We know some of those obstacles, political and otherwise. And we also know about people just snatching things illegally from people, whether it's lands, ancestral lands, and so forth, and thinking that it's okay to take people's things, whether it's lands and law books and whatever. Mr. Wayne Caesar, your reflection as we look at the time, and this is not limiting you. Feel free to talk, reflect on growing up and hearing about the heroes like Coffee and Damien and others, and especially when you, I'm not sure when was the first time you went from Plaisance to Georgetown, and I wouldn't get into that. So, what was it like taking a first peek at the 1763 monument and learning about coffee and so forth?
Well, first, Mark, in learning about coffee, I was very, very impressed. I remember that class quite vividly. I was very focused in that class because it was interesting. The teacher really got my attention when we spoke on that topic. And, in going around the Square of the Revolution and seeing that impressive monument, listen, Coffee is a personal hero of mine. In my opinion, he is the father of freedom in Guyana. And His Excellency would have said earlier, you know, emancipation, all Guyanese would have benefited from emancipation. So it is important on August 1st for every single Guyanese to participate in the emancipation exercise. That being said, Damon, Kwamina, and Amsterdam, they were also very, very important. But I personally feel that 1763 revolt would have set the stage. Coffee would have given them a template. I thought that is what they would have gained from that 1763 revolt because he had them on the brink, but they tricked him by trying to negotiate with him. And the negotiation was just done, to give them time to wait on their armies to come in. Hence, they were able to recapture and take back over their plantations. But I think Coffee would have given the template to everyone as far as, us being able to attain that emancipation eventually. But many thanks to the other martyrs also. They are all very, very, very important in their own way. Now, going forward to, after 185 years, why we have not been able to eradicate, emancipation, like really eradicate and see where our people see growth with our people. There are many factors that contributed to this, in my opinion, Mark, because listen, if the people were able to emancipate themselves, that would not leave a good taste in the mouth of the Europeans. So they went back to the drawing board and they came up with other methods of oppression. And it's those other methods of oppression that they would have placed on the African Guyanese and the African villages, basically in revenge for what would have happened, us being able to get emancipation. So I think we're still fighting to get out of that. And Mark, what I find is that many times, we receive instructions and not instructions from the right people, as to, hey, you guys need to do this, and you're going to find better development. Your people, you're going to be able to develop your people better. I think the strategy in developing our villages and developing our people needs to be developed by us, ourselves. just like how we would have developed the strategy for emancipation. Nobody developed that for us, Mark. We did it on our own and it worked. So if it would have worked once, it definitely could work twice. So as a people, we need to come together. We need to focus. We need to pay attention to our values and not move away from our values. And I feel like if we're going to be able to wiggle ourselves out of the oppression that we're currently facing, listen, we're in the 21st century, Mark, and I would not have expected to be using the word oppression. But with the current government that we have in place in Guyana, I am forced to use that word based on what I have been seeing. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mr. Caesar. Lots of things that we are observing every single day, reminiscent of the 23 years what we witnessed. But this is Anansi Web Education, and we are basically talking about emancipation. August 1st, Emancipation Day. What is there to celebrate? We're not seeing much activities thus far, especially from those who are in office, but we can understand why. Uh, when Wayne said that his class, his favorite subject there, when they were teaching about coffee and so forth, it reminds me of my time when I was listening to little school out there at Wellington Park. Maybe Mr. Granger familiar with Wellington Park Primary School. The first time that I was taught about coffee, I felt good. And so I wanted to demonstrate to the teacher what coffee did back then, which was run away. I wanted to run out of that classroom. And so when Wayne spoke about that, reminded me of what I wanted to do when I was in Prep 8. But on a serious note, folks, as we prepare to wrap down today's program, we will close off with, how can the annual celebration of emancipation improve people's lives today? How can it improve people's lives today? Mr. Granger, close off on that, please.
Well, I could only summarize what Shalon and Wayne said. They have brought rich experiences to this conversation. And what they said is inspirational. And this is a good reason why people of African descent should consider 1st of August not only as a historical event, but as a time of, it's almost like New Year's Day, in which you make New Year's resolutions. We must solve these problems. We must take inspiration from our ancestors and from our martyrs. And nothing, if you understood what happened in slavery, I mean, it was the worst form of oppression. And if they were able to overcome the worst form of oppression, there's nothing happening in Guyana in 2023 that we cannot overcome. And I'm very impressed with what Wayne and Shalon have said, that this day, 1st of August 2023, must be inspirational. And every year we must remember that our ancestors fought to make us free, and we need to use our intellect and our assets to ensure that our children and grandchildren do not have to go through these trials and tribulations that our forefathers had to go through. I'm very happy to join this conversation, and I feel that the annual celebration of emancipation is important in creating a spirit of renaissance in which a whole community being reborn and resolving together to overcome the obstacles that face us. We can do it. Our forefathers with less did more, and we can do it.
Absolutely. We can do it indeed. We can do it. Wayne said that earlier. President Granger just said it again. In 1838, our ancestors did that. Even before that, they paved the way for that. And what's happening in 2023 is nothing compared to what our ancestors did to pave the way for us to be where we are today. We need betterment indeed. Miss Washington, how can the annual celebration of emancipation improve people's lives today, as we close off with you?
Mark, they who do not know their history are doomed to repeat their past. And I think emancipation being part of our history and something that we're aware of, we're conscious of, I think it's a roadmap for us to use moving forward into the future. I think we can always reflect, like President Granger just said, look back, reflect on it, and then we should use that as an inspiration to figure out where we're going and how we're going to move forward. We can use that to set programs, to implement plans, to implement various things to help us to move ourselves forward out of poverty, out of oppression, because we have to find ways continuously. It's not just we sit down today and we solve one problem today and then tomorrow it's over. Every year emancipation comes around and we reflect, but not just reflecting, but we should find ways and means of how to move our people out of poverty, move our people forward, find ways and means. We have organizations, but we need to try to use it to its fullest to see how we can continuously set ourselves free from mental slavery. Also, mental slavery is one of the most powerful form of slavery, not just physical. And our foreparent, our heroes, they fought for physical, but the mental aspect of it, we need to try to move and to always work towards getting our minds free, so that as Guyanese people, as we celebrate our Emancipation Day, as we celebrate what our ancestors has done, we too should be able to use that and use it as a roadmap to move forward, to ensure that our generation to come, our future with children, they will be not just free physically, but mentally they'll be able to say, well, I can stand up as a free Guyanese indeed. And I have also found ways how to eradicate poverty from our fellow Guyanese brothers and sisters' lives who are still struggling today. I think that's what it should be about. Most importantly, finding roadmaps to move ourselves forward and to eradicate poverty, widespread poverty from Afro Guyanese.
Well said, Ms. Shellon Washington, attorney at law. We go to our content in closing off with him. How can the annual celebration of emancipation improve people's lives today? Wayne Caesar?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. My comment on this would be we need to be very frontal in our position, because what I am seeing right now is that the current government is seeking to dismiss African history across Guyana. Hence, there are no real programs or events planned for August 1st, and they should be. As His Excellency would have said earlier, that emancipation would have benefited all Guyanese. So we should all be celebrating this. So I'm quite disappointed that there are no events planned for emancipation. I say this to the opposition: we need to have a march, we need to have something, to show respect and to pay respect for our ancestors. Listen, August 1st is a day for, as a Guyanese, if you're down, August 1st is a day to feel empowered. When we look back at what our ancestors would have accomplished, and as His Excellency said, under much worse oppression than we are facing today, that should empower and encourage us, to move forward as a people and to take a step forward instead of a step backward. Mark, this can be accomplished, and I am very, very confident that as a people, we are going to be successful. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wayne Caesar. Thank you so much, His Excellency David Arthur Granger. Thank you so much, Her Excellency Shellon Washington. I'm sorry, His Excellency Wayne Caesar, too. Sorry about that, too. I don't want anyone to feel left out. When I'm done with this here, maybe sometime tomorrow I'll go in my backyard and see what is there that I can plant: shallot, belange, okra, something. But what are you guys doing in your backyard? Give us a quickly, Miss Washington. Are you utilizing summer to do something?
Unfortunately, I cannot utilize my backyard. I have a deer issue where I live. So the deers and the raccoons, and
Oh dear.
they will, Yeah, they would scale the fence and they would eat every single one of those things.
I
Unfortunately,
hope those raccoons aren't political raccoons, some of whom are.
they probably are. They probably are because we have a lot of political raccoons in Ghana. So
Oh,
those ones are probably from there. They probably
Mr.
migrated to my backyard.
What about you, Wayne? What are you planting in your backyard?
Oh, well, in my backyard, you can find hot peppers, sweet peppers, tomatoes, blueberries, squash, and eggplant, which we call belange in Guyana. Yes.
And
So I do,
tomatoes.
yes,
We
yes.
plant tomatoes in Guyana, but you're planting tomatoes in America.
Tomatoes in America. Right, Shalon? Tomatoes we say, right?
Yeah, gotcha. Mr. Granger,
Yeah.
what about your backyard? What's going on? Planting?
Okras, tomatoes, pak choy, and of course peppers. And well, I grew up in the quarantine, and we call it baigan. Baigan. But those are the things which I need to keep me alive. Tomatoes, of course, are very important, and of course the green leafy vegetables, particularly pak choy, and to some extent cabbage and broccoli. I use up most of my yard space.
One of these days, we'll have to take a view of what's going on there in your backyard. Sorry about those political raccoons, Miss Washington. Really sorry. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you all so much, and all of our listeners from Guyana, around the other parts of the world. But it's Emancipation Day. Let's get that vibe, let's get that beat, let's get that pride. Let's show some respect, maximum respect to our African ancestors who were able to pave the way for us to be here. All of us, not just us, but all of us to be here. In a beautiful, beautiful country, Guyana, that was transformed from what it was to what it is today. We salute our African ancestors for paving that way in a very big way. Thank you so much, Mr. Granger. Thank you so much, Ms. Washington. And thank you so much, Mr. Caesar, and all of our listeners as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark, for having us.
Happy
Thank you.
Emancipation.
Happy emancipation.
Happy
Happy
emancipation.
emancipation all.
Happy emancipation, guys. Happy.